For the British Saints, the Trail of Hope began at the Albert Docks on the Mersey River in Liverpool, England.
They hoped that they would be able to create New Zion. They hoped it would be better than the world they had turned their backs on in the East or in England. Some of those converts came 6,000 miles to get to New Zion, coming from Liverpool. That made it the longest trail of all the trails in the West.
What is in store for the poor people on the shores of the Great Salt Lake? What happy delusions they are laboring under now. On what miserable blindness their eyes may be opened then, I do not pretend to say. But I went on board their ship to bear testimony against them if they deserved it, as I fully believe they would. To my great astonishment, they did not deserve it. Charles Dickens.
The Mormon ship is a family under strong and accepted discipline, with every provision for comfort, decorum, and internal peace. London Times.
More than 30,000 boarded sailing ships and later steamers for the first stage of a lengthy and dramatic journey.
When I was in my 12th year, my parents joined the Latter-day Saints. The following May, we started for Utah. We left our home May 19th, 1856. We sailed on the 25th. I well remember how we watched Old England fade from sight. We sang "Farewell, Our Native Land, Farewell." When we were a few days out, a large shark followed the vessel. One of the saints died and he was buried at sea. We never saw the shark anymore. Mary Goebel Pay.
After the large migrations of the early 1850s, the perpetual emigrating fund ran out.
I have been thinking how we should operate another year. We cannot afford to purchase wagons and teams as in times past. I am consequently thrown back upon my old plan to make handcarts and let the emigration foot it. They can come as quick, if not quicker, and much cheaper. If it is once tried, you will find that it will become the favorite mode of crossing the plains. Brigham Young.
It was an experiment on Brigham Young's part. He had to face economic realities in organizing his march. He did not have infinite financial resources. He was, as it were, working on a very tight budget. Indeed, there was, I believe, some desperation in this notion, and perhaps it was an error on his part, but it was an error born of necessity.
Hope was so overpowering a feeling that some of the converts from England had no idea what it was going to be really like. They had no idea what a handcart was, what it meant to carry or pull a 600-pound loaded cart for 1,000 miles over mountains, rocks, rivers, what have you. But hope was the dominant light, I think, that led them right west from the minute they started out.
From 1856 to 1860, wagon trains still worked their way west, but 3,000 pioneers, unable to afford the wagon and team, pushed and pulled their way to Salt Lake by handcart. Each person was allowed 17 pounds of baggage. Generally, 5 people were assigned to each handcart.
We took up our march with the first handcart company that ever crossed the plains. Myself and 2 of my children pulled 2 handcarts for over 1,400 miles. Joseph Argyle.
A happier crowd of people than we were when we left Iowa City, hitched to our handcarts, would be hard to find. We were filled with joy at the prospects of coming home, and nothing seemed too hard a task for us to undertake. Ellen Jackson Goldsboro.
I think the handcart people
was so hopeful that they didn't bother about the hardships because they thought it had a purpose. And that was very important. It made a psychological difference that gave them a kind of strength that the ordinary migrant would not have.
This journey was very hard because we did not have half enough to eat for the support of our bodies. Robert David Roberts.
Wagons with provisions accompanied each handcart company. The standard ration allowed 1 pint of flour per adult each day. Children received less.
At night, we often went to bed without supper. There was very little food to cook, and we were too tired to cook it. Mary Powell.
You felt as if you could almost eat a rusty nail or gnaw a file, for you never got enough to eat. John Jacks.
When we got a chunk of buffalo meat, Father put it in the handcart. Father said we would save it for Sunday dinner. I was so very hungry and the meat smelled so good to me while pushing the handcart that I could not resist. I had a little pocket knife, and with it I cut off a piece or two each half day. Although I expect a severe whipping when Father found it out, I cut off little pieces each day. I would chew them so long that they got white and perfectly tasteless. When Father came to get the meat, he asked me if I have been cutting off some of it. I said yes. I was so hungry I could not let it alone. Instead of giving me a scolding or whipping, Father turned away and wiped tears from his eyes. John Stuckey.
Out on the trail, the pioneers had to work together and live together. 20 or more were assigned to each tent.
There were in our tent my husband with 1 leg, 2 blind men, a man with 1 arm, and a widow with 5 children. Priscilla Merriman Evans.
The first 3 handcart companies were welcomed to Salt Lake by brass bands, church dignitaries, and townspeople bearing gifts. Of the 10 companies, 8 arrived in the valley with no major misfortune.
We had no trouble of any kind crossing the plains, only fatigue. John Parry.
We reached Salt Lake City, tired, weary, with bleeding feet, our clothing worn out and so weak that we were nearly starved, but thankful to our Heavenly Father for bringing us to Zion. Priscilla Merriman Evans.
The Willie and Martin handcart companies started out too late in the season. Halfway across Nebraska, they stopped for more provisions and repairs. They could have waited out the winter and begun their trek again in the spring, but they decided to push on. For the most part, they were city dwellers and not prepared to face the harsh frontier.
I can remember of being at a meeting one night when Brother Levi Savage, a returning missionary, arose and spoke. He counseled the old, weak and sickly to stop until another spring. The tears commenced to flow down his cheeks, and he prophesied that if such undertook the journey at that late season of the year, that their bones would strew the way. George Cunningham, Willie Company.
The decision was put to a vote of the people. Filled with enthusiasm, the emigrants voted to continue their journey. Nearly 100 dropped out of the 2 companies. The rest pushed on.
Brethren and sisters, what I have said I know to be true, but seeing you are to go forward, I will go with you, will suffer with you, and if necessary, I will die with you. May God in his mercy bless and preserve us. Levi Savage.
When the autumn rains turned to early snows, it was too late to turn around. Soon, hope was all but abandoned. Still, they tried to carry on.
No one sang, no one talked. Folks just pushed along at their own pace and tried not to think of how the days and nights stretch into weeks and months before the last of them found a long sleep in a trench of snow. John Jacks, Martin Company.
When morning came, Father's body, along with others who had died during the night, were buried in a deep hole. Brush was thrown in and then dirt. A fire was built over the grave to kill the scent, to keep the wolves from digging up the remains. I can see Mother's face as she sat looking at the partly conscious group. Her eyes looked so dead that I was afraid. She didn't sit long, however. When it was time to move out, Mother had her family ready to go. She put her invalid son in the cart with her baby, and we joined the train. Our mother was a strong woman, and she would see us through anything. Lolita Dixon, Willie Company.
Men whom I'd known all the way from Liverpool, who had been true as steel in every stage of our journey, who in their homes in England and Scotland had never known want, whose hearts were cast in too great a mould to descend to a mean act or brook dishonour. Such men as these came to me and begged bread. Cold weather, scarcity of food soon produced their effects. Our old and infirm began to droop, and they no sooner lost spirit and courage than death's stamp could be traced upon their features. Life went out as smoothly as a lamp ceases to burn when the oil is gone. John Chislett, Willie Company.
This counts as the single worst disaster in the overland migration of the 19th century. And I think the responsibility for it has to be laid at the same door, that is the door of Brigham Young. So his great power of organizing here came up against an insurmountable object, and that was the unpredictability and the harshness of the Great Plains environment.
Upon hearing of the plight of the handcart pioneers, Brigham Young rose at October General Conference and rallied the saints to again gather in the poor.
Franklin D. Richards and his associates, who were traveling in a light buggy with good teams, came in on Saturday and reported to Brigham Young, and on Sunday morning he stood before the congregation in the tabernacle in Salt Lake City and said that his sermon for the day would be the people out on the plains, caught in the snows. He